So you all have in front of you the PDF that I sent?
Yep.
Okay, let's look at it because this is a summary. Makes it a little easier to follow. A summary of the three opinions, the three explanations regarding the following halacha. So let's just go through the chart. So top left-hand corner, we're going to do the top line now. So the second day of Pesach is the Omer offering, and the Omer offering permits personal consumption. In Hebrew, Omer matir b'medina. Medina means the countryside, everywhere outside the Beis Hamikdash. No one may partake of the new grain until the Omer offering is brought. 7 weeks later, we have to count 7 weeks, Shavuos. So here we have the two breads, the shtei halechem, that had to be leavened, dafke chometz, which we'll learn about in a moment. So this permits temple offering, shtei halechem in Hebrew, matir b'mikdash. So no one can bring a mincha, korban mincha to the Beis Hamikdash of the new crop until the two breads, the shtei halechem, are brought in the Beis Hamikdash. Gavoya means the one above. That's the term that the Gemara always uses in reference to Hashem or service to Him. The Gavoya. It's for heaven, for the one above. Now, below that in the center, and it's placed in the center because the scenario is the Mishnah describing a case. It says the Mishnah in Tractate Menachos. If the person brought a korban from the new grain before the Omer was brought, it's invalid. There's nothing to talk about. The mincha, the korban, is invalid. However, if you brought it after the Omer was brought, but did not wait for Shavuos, let's read what it says. If brought as korban, a mincha, a grain offering is called a mincha. The word mincha means literally a gift. So it's nevertheless valid. You should not, but it's valid. Before the Omer, invalid. But if you brought it before the Omer, then there's no, it's absolutely possible. In the words of the Mishnah, im hevi kosher. If he did bring it, he shouldn't, but if he did, after the fact, it's kosher. So this is the question, why is it that after the fact it's kosher? The Torah says you have to wait till the law is, the Mishnah says, started off saying you have to wait till Shavuos. Why after the fact is it kosher? And for that matter, if he brought the grain, as we just said, as a korban and didn't wait for the Omer offering, it took this grain, took root after the Omer was brought, then it's invalid even after the fact. So the Omer is absolute, but the Shavuos offering is not, the shtei halechem is not. Why not? So three explanations. First explanation posits, this is all brought down in the Rishonim, the Achanim, the Ritva, and others. The first Rishon means the early scholars, post-Talmudic, post actually. First came the Goinim, then came the Rishonim. The genre of the Rambam, Rashi, and those. So there we find the three views. Number one, in essence, it's one prohibition. The Torah is saying, B'nai Yisrael, Kindalach, Yidden, don't eat the new crop until it's one prohibition, but it's lifted in stages. Once the Omer is brought, you can have it personally. Once the shtei halechem is brought, you can bring it as a korban. So there we have our answer. Since it's one prohibition and it's now being weakened because A has been lifted, the first part has been lifted, therefore that's the law. Really, you should wait till when? Till the shtei halechem. But since you waited at least for the Omer to be brought, you did respect the law in part. So after the fact, we'll accept it. This is a classic halachic model that when a isur, a prohibition, is weakened, it allows for, it's weakened in its force, and therefore there is a permissibility, whatever the case may be. And in our case, the permissibility is the kashrus, the validity of the korban. The korban is kosher even though you didn't wait for Shavuos because the isur is no longer in full force because you did wait till the Omer was off. That's the first position. The second position argues with the first and says, no, it's not one prohibition lifted in stages. There are two separate prohibitions. However, they differ to begin with in the nature of their prohibition. Namely, the first one, let's read it. So two prohibitions. First is absolute. The first one is absolute. You may not eat of the new crop. Now, since you may not eat of the new crop, you certainly can't bring it as a korban. It's not yours to bring. So if you bring a korban before the omer is brought, it's worth nothing because it's not yours. The first condition is got to belong to you. However, if you waited for the omer, and now you've got one prohibition, a second prohibition that you're facing, and that prohibition is that not to bring it till the shtei alechem is brought on Shavuos. To begin with, let's read it. Second, to begin with, not absolute. Why is not absolute? The Torah says don't. Because when it comes to kodshim, when it comes to the laws of sacrificial foods or offerings, or any law related to kodshim, so it requires a repeated prohibition to be absolute. If the Torah doesn't say it twice, it means don't. But after the fact, if certain conditions are met, it would be kosher. But if it repeats it twice, then it's absolute. The Torah does not repeat this prohibition twice. And therefore, it's not an absolute prohibition to begin with. So as long as it belongs to you, because you're respected the omer, this second prohibition is weaker. It's a separate one, not like the first view. It's a separate one, but to begin with, since it's not repeated, doesn't have the force of absoluteness. So as long as it's yours, okay, we'll accept it. You should not have done it, but it's still kosher. Your mincha, your korban that you brought is valid. You need not bring a second one, another korban. For whatever reason you're bringing your korban. That's the second view. The third view is most interesting. And the third view says, it's not, first of all, it disagrees that it's one long prohibition. No. Disagrees with the second view that there's two prohibitions, one stricter than the other, as we explained, the nuance of that. He says to begin, there's only one prohibition, and it only applies to the omer. Beginning and end of story. The Torah says outright, do not eat any grain, and you not may benefit from it, from grain, parched grain, toasted grain, lechem, v'koli, v'karamel, soichel, bread, and all of its stages. We looked at all we read the biblical sources in the Torah in our first year. Do not eat. That's it. That's the problem. What it comes to. That the prohibition only is talking about the omer. What about the shtei alechem? Let's look carefully what the Torah says. There's no in the whole thing. It doesn't say no anywhere. It just says your first offering of the new crop should be the shtei alechem, the two breads and Shavuos, which means don't bring anything before. But the Torah's command to us is framed in the shtei alechem on Shavuos. That's your first. Hence, don't bring it before. So what does it come out? It's a very interesting understanding, a very profound understanding. It's not like there's a prohibition of bringing grain. As long as you waited for the omer, it's yours. It's not like there's a prohibition of bringing a korban before Shavuos. Your korban is valid. That's not the problem. It's 100% valid. You ruined, however, the fact that the shtei halechem be the first korban. So yours is valid. But now the mitzvah that the first crop to be used should be Shavuos, you chaptarain, and you brought yours before. So that can no longer be. So a positive command can be fulfilled. A future positive command can be fulfilled because what you did now. But what you did now, there's no prohibition. There's no prohibition. It's your grain. You can bring a korban. There's something else. Don't bring it because we want the first grain to be the first. So the don't is really only a consequence of the positive commandment that shtei alechem be number one. It doesn't invalidate an iota, your korban. And on the contrary, don't make your korban first. We want the shtei alechem to be first. So the mitzvah is the shtei alechem to be first. So this explains why, of course, your korban is valid. But what did you just do? The person brought a korban after the omer, didn't wait for Shavuos. Shavuos is no longer going to be from the first crop. You chaptarain, you did it from the first crop. Now the nafka mina we had learned is, what's the practical difference in halacha in these explanations? You recall, no doubt, the practical difference is, once somebody did, he waited till the omer, he brings his korban is kosher. Now, problem is that Shavuos is no longer going to be from the first crop. Does the court then say, okay, you know what, someone did it, everybody can now bring their korbanos, because anyway, Shavuos is not going to be the first crop? According to the third view, yes. There's no point in anybody else not bringing their korbanos from the new crop. Not have to wait for Shavuos anymore. because it's not going to be the first anymore. That's been already impossible to rectify. Your korban is valid, so go ahead and bring it. According to the first two views, of course not. You should wait, either because the prohibition is there, stage 2 prohibition, respect it, or because it's a separate prohibition. It's not as absolute, but it's still a prohibition. So don't bring it just because because one person did, no one else should, and the same person himself cannot bring further korbanos either. He did one sin, don't do a second one. But according to the third view, there's no problem at all. Once the korban is brought, it was never a problem with the korban. The problem always was not the prohibition of your korban. It's the shtei alechem is not going to be the first. Because, as you look on the page there, the Torah doesn't actually say, don't bring it. All it says is, mincha chadosha. Pay attention when you read the Torah reading on Shavuos. That on Shavuos, you should bring a new offering, mincha. It's called bikurim. It's also called bikurim. It's first, bechayr is in firstborn. Different kinds of bikurim we have. That Shavuos says your mincha chadosha, your first offering. That's the positive command. That should be number one. There's no actually don't bring it earlier. It's an inference, but not an actual commandment in the Torah. So it's a whole different way of understanding. We just told you the practical difference. Are we clear on the three views? Yeah, folks. Yeah. Now we're going to explain it all in the light of Chassidus and how beautiful and exquisite this is. Let's begin our journey. So on page, do you have the page saved number? Yeah, page 135, by bottom of the right-hand column, Beis. Klal Omru Chazal. Our sages said in the Gemara in Eidav, in a famous teaching, what the Gemara says, talking about the disputes of Shammai and Hillel, Eilu ve'eilu divre elikim. Let's see it inside the text. Shekol deyo svara. Every opinion and reasoning, shehuva b'Torah, that is part of bona fide Torah. I don't speak of someone coming up with an idea. He may be a big rabbi and a big scholar. It doesn't mean Torah is saying it. It could be his opinion. How do you know if it's Torah or it's him? That's a good question, not for now. It's a very critical question. If he's quoting something, he's quoting something, but he gives you his own insight, his own application. He could be wrong. Could be absolutely wrong. So how do you know if he's not? Okay, I'll leave that for another time. So when I say here, when he says here that every opinion in Torah, we mean bona fide Torah. I should say this. This is important to know, that up until, this is from the Baal Shem Tov, if you taught this, up until the Marsha, Rabbi Shlomo Ideres, his commentary appears at the back of every standard Gemara, who lived some 300 years ago, 400 years ago. All the scholars of the Talmud, the Mishnah, and of course the Zohar, Medrash, Gemara, Rishonim, all wrote divinely inspired, and all their words are true. After that, not necessarily. We have to have a special criteria, and it's not simple. In general, there's one rule of thumb that if all of the majority of the Jewish people accept a certain view, then that means heaven has given its seal of approval. But if it's not, and very often it's not, a question of dispute, and especially when it comes to hashkafa things, what is the attitude, and there's a tremendous confusion, and can be the biggest rabbi and in a fiery speech. No, it's his opinion. You can take it or leave it. Sometimes you should leave it. So how do you know? Again, that's not for now. It's a very critical question. But it's not such a huge question because the major issues of Yiddishkeit are already discussed in the earlier scholars, and they're universally divinely inspired, wrote with Ruach HaKodesh. The truth is, I shouldn't say it's not so important. It is. There's tremendous issues we face today, like Zionism, for example, and other questions. What's the Torah view? These are critical questions. So how do you know which of the sages has the right opinion? A cliffhanger, we'll leave it. It's not clear. It's not a black and white answer either. It's very neat, because if it was neat, then they wouldn't have a question. It's not neat. But at any rate, let's go back to our subject. So here we're talking about opinions in Torah. Let's continue the text. And even though what you're going to hear now, friend, this is unique to Chassidus that revealed this depth. And that is, even when it comes to the ruling, they argue in points of law, practicality. So the ruling has to be like one. The ruling is like one. That's the final halacha. There is still place. The idea, the teaching, gam l'shar hadeyis, even for the other views whose opinion has not been accepted as a practical ruling, they still remain valid. Deeper, top of the next column. Incredible statement coming down, friends. Haklal, this principle we just quoted from the Gemara in the Eilev, these and those are the words of the living God, from Teshama and Hillel and all arguments in Torah, in the Gemara, in Mishnah. This statement, Maidi Einu, teaches us, in addition to the fact, not only are all the opinions part of Torah with respect to learning, but we learn all of the opinions. So they remain valid because they're part of Torah learning. Not only that, the Rebbe is saying, but yesh l'chol deya mokim ba'avodas Hashem b'poyel. Each opinion has something to offer in the actual service of God. Not in the way you're going to do that particular mitzvah, but the message in attitude, in service of God, in overall level, as we'll see demonstrated here, these three views, remain, all of them, valid, and critical. Let's go further. That the law is ruled only according to one. That's when it comes to action. You can't do it this way and that way. It's either permitted or not permitted. You do it this way, you do it that way. He's either obligated or he's exempt, whatever they're arguing about, whatever the nature of the halacha is. Obviously, we cannot rule according to both views when they argue, yes or no, liable, not liable, give back, don't give back, pay, don't pay. Obviously, you can't do both. However, but if you look at that mitzvah on the spiritual level, there's room for all of the opinions, and they're all complementary and harmonious. Next paragraph, that means to say, every opinion in Torah, and again, legitimate Torah, bona fide Torah, not my opinion, Torah's opinion. There is a conclusion, a practical message on the spiritual service, and this dimension, the spiritual message. It's possible, in the brackets he adds, sometimes it's a critical message. You need to know that opinion on a spiritual level and apply it on a spiritual plane. L'kayim, to be fulfilled, gam im b'negei l'maaseh in halacha k'maaseh. Even if in the physical practicality of it, we're not doing it like that view, but the spiritual message remains valid. Now, you all know, just for example, that he's not going into this now, that just a related thing, that the Arizal taught that the halacha will be like Shammai when Mashiach comes. Now like Hillel, then like Shammai, and the reason explained at length, so this is not going to go into it now. But Rebbe is not saying that. He's not saying that one day it will be relevant. They were talking about action, which also tells us it's relevant now, but we're going to only observe it when Mashiach comes. He's saying something else here. That's also true, and that's a different and another dimension to this whole discussion. Here we're saying even now, in the present, when Allah has decided like one opinion, Rabbi Yehuda, not Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir's opinion remains spiritually, must be learned, and has spiritual application. Now we're going to apply that to our case. These three opinions, these three explanations as to what is the nature of the Shtei Halechem, that repeating the three views again now, spiritually we'll now see. Let's begin our journey. In our case, these three opinions, in defining what exactly is the mitzvah of the two breads, or the prohibition, Is it one long prohibition lifted in stages? Is it two? Absolute, not absolute? Is it no prohibition at all? It's just that it should be the first, right? Just summarize the three views very quickly. We will see now and explain that there are three paths and levels in the service and spiritual conduct of a Jew. And he's got to know all three, and they're applicable to him. Especially, what's the subject matter here? The subject matter here is the korban, the offering. When it comes to korbanos, a very important component is intent. Is the intent and thought of the person. When he brings the korban, we don't find this in any other mitzvah. That intent, the wrong intent, will invalidate a person that brings a korban, and this korban can only be eaten within the walls of Jerusalem. For example, he has in mind he's going to eat it outside. Invalid, the whole thing invalid. Or korbanos have their times. Some can be eaten for that day and that night till the morning. Others have 2 days and one night in between, like the korban toida. If he has in mind to eat it after the time, it's called pigul. Means an improper, unsavory thought, and the korban's invalid. We don't find this by the mitzvahs. That's such a detail. Would invalidate the korban. Why? Because korbanos is not just obviously the physical offering of the animal. It's really the animal soul within. And it's all about intent and about attitude and about refinement of character, etc., as we will see. And so therefore intent is critical, much when it comes to korbanos, more so than other mitzvahs. You put on film and just putting on film, you're yaitze. The Lord's mitzvahs don't require kavanah, except for korbanos. The Torah is explicit it does. The woman is bathing in the ocean. And she doesn't even know about mikveh. Doesn't even know there's such a mitzvah. But it happens to turn out that she's bathing in the ocean, swimming, she's on vacation, or now in the summer here in North America, and it happens to be the time she has to go to the mikveh for a monthly cycle. Pure. She lives with her husband, it's pure. Otherwise, they live together, it's chodosh. It's a severe prohibition of chodosh, which means cut off. She had no idea. But she's pure, that's the halacha, which is, by the way, this is from Moishe Feinstein. It's a whole big famous tshuva, but there are many children that are born that the parents weren't observant and so on, and they were born in purity. If they were born 9 months after they'd gone on vacation, whatever it is, so you never know. But even if it's not the case, every neshama is pure. That's another discussion. The mikveh, what it does for the child. But at any rate, what are we saying? I'm contrasting that. Another example, tzedakah. This is the halacha. If you lost some money, happened to me a few times. With my hands in my pocket, take something out, and I lost $100 note in the airport. It happened at least twice, crazily. US. Finished. Oh, hands in my pocket, and I rue the fact. I'm upset. $100 is... The halacha is, if a poor person will find it, Mashgacha Pratis, God has his ways. I did the mitzvah of tzedakah. I don't even know it. I regret that I lost the money. The mitzvah of tzedakah was done. And by the sense I'm talking is, by the way, everything is divine providence. May not have been the poor person that found it. One thing I will guarantee you. The person that found it had to find it. It had to be from me. Because the previous lifetimes, who knows? I owed him $100. Or that value, who knows when? I never paid him. In reincarnation, I lose it, he finds it. Meant to be. I'm just illustrating to you. First of all, my main point here is that you don't have to have intent for the mitzvah to be fulfilled. But I just added this dimension, which Chassidus gives us. That's why the study of Chassidus, we learn this, it creates such a inner peace for everything that happens. Because we see and understand, you have the understanding behind it, that everything is divine providence, everything that happens, everything. Certainly things that I didn't intend. Even things I intended to do, at the end of the day, it's meant to be, teshuvah. That's why it engenders such a deep simcha, such a deep joy, connectiveness, wholesomeness, and holding it all together. You don't get bent out of joint and upset and broiges every 5 minutes. Things don't go my way. They go God's way, and that's what counts. And that is for my best too. So what are you getting nervous about? The case in point, friends, when this flight was canceled, obviously the reaction would be, and money was spent too, because we had to. It's like a grand meal, for a wedding, a beautiful meal. We rented a tent, and it's a beautiful thing is going to culminating, which we're going to do. The reaction of everybody, including the people that donated, was unbelievable to see. It was so obvious it's the hand of God. We're bringing Jews to the Rebbe. This is a holy moment. And Hashem is saying, not today. Okay. It was so strong. Everybody reacted. Nobody was upset, and there was nobody. It's like stunned. We were stunned. But right away, it's to bring to greater good. It'll be bigger, it'll be better, and so on. And today, you get the emails to those who were signed up, or the video, urging everybody to put on film if you don't, or another mitzvahs. Anyway, that was all an aside. All an aside. So all we're saying here is that in general, mitzvahs do not require intent, but the korban does. All to say, what's he saying with this? That therefore, these three opinions, even though the halacha is only like one, but spiritually, in terms of intent, they are still valid, especially when the subject matter is the korban, which is largely about intent. It's over the last 3 lines of the page. The famous chinuch, it's a famous sefer. We don't know who the author is. The chinuch, which means educate. And he goes through and explains all the 613 mitzvahs on a very, very profound level. He writes, korban. What's the korban? The whole idea of korban is bringing an animal on the altar. I mean, it disturbs the sensibilities of modern man. Offering, sacrifice. So Chassidus has much to say about it, but just he writes, the act of the korban is meant to arouse feelings. Next page, these acts are all designed to arouse his intent to the matter at hand, whether it's a guilt offering, a sin offering, a thanksgiving offering. According to the Shivas means different korbanos. Some cost more, some cost less. There's bigger libations, smaller, bigger meal offerings, smaller meal. These are all meant to understand what he's doing. This is more severe, less severe, etc. Vachanos in the preparation. Hatoiv is good preparation. The more he has to prepare, and the more the laws here are all meant to arouse the heart. So the chinuch is saying it's all about arousing the heart. The Ramban says, when it comes to the sin offering, the person should view himself, I should be on the altar. It should be me. God gave me life. He said, here's the rule book, follow it, do it. I didn't, so life is, that's it. Not worth living. Yet he doesn't. So the whole point is, it should arouse these feelings of sincere gratitude and so on. So korban is all about kavanah, more than other mitzvahs in a way. Hence, if we're looking at these opinions, the kavanah, the intent, the svara, the ideas that they are posited by the 3 schools of thought are all valid spiritually. I just want to add something. The Moida Ani, just a little story. The detail I have to get straight. But this is a kid in Crown Heights, not from a Lubavitch family. I'm not mistaken. This is looking in the 60s when Crown Heights was not just Chabad. In those days, Crown Heights was the Jewish neighborhood. You know the story. Then a black doctor moved in and another black, and people panicked, and prices fell, and they moved to Borough Park and moved to other places. The Rebbe fought a mighty war not to leave. What are you leaving? What are you running away? At the end was only Chabad stayed. But back in the day, the shuls, the Bati Midrashim, and Rebbes were there. The biggest conservative synagogue in America was there in Eastern Parkway, Teitza Chabad Yeshiva. Famous Richard Tucker used to sing there, Chazan in this conservative temple, opera singer. Anyway, so I'm talking those days. So there was a grocery that the Rebbe would buy from. The Rebbe would buy a grocery in Kingston Avenue, wherever it was. not owned by Lubavitch. Lubavitch was a minority in the 50s and 60s, very small. The previous Rebbe chose, 770 Eastern Parkway in the heart of, was WASP. It was WASP America. That's what it was. And that's where he put his roots down. The early Lubavitch didn't live in Crown Heights. They lived in Brownsville. Used to walk to 770. It was a handful after the war. It was a ragtag handful of Jews. That's what Chabad was. Literally half. So anyway, this is those early days. This is now the 50s. So the kid used to deliver the groceries, friendly with the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe's wife, the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka. And there's more to the story, but this is the bottom line. He asked the Rebbetzin, what's the Rebbe's favorite prayer? So she said, all of them. He said, I'm sure there's something a favorite. She said, well, I'll ask him. So the Rebbetzin is asking, and she comes back and she tells him subsequently, the next delivery, whatever the store, when she went shopping, the Rebbe said, Maidan. Over the years, they spoke at length about Maidani, but basically, Maidani is it's a new day. What was, it's a new day and a new opportunity. If you look at the words, Maidani lefanecha, there's different ways to understand it, but I thank you, Shechazati ben Yishmasi bechemlo, if you returned my soul compassionately, then there's a period, you have to put the period after bechemlo, Rabbi monasecha, great is your faith. Great is your faith or faithfulness. What's that? Great is God's faith, our faith. Emunah secha, your emunah, our emunah. Great is our faith in you. What is this? No. Great is your faith in us. And even though maybe yesterday I didn't do what I did and I failed here or there, despite my failing, you give me my neshama back to my body, and today is going to be a better day. And so it continues. Your faith is infinite. And you grant me another day, God willing, another day, and we don't take it for granted. And that's how the day begins, with gratitude. It's a new day, notwithstanding yesterday's, and actually, never mind notwithstanding yesterday's failure, notwithstanding yesterday's achievements. Today's got to be more. And your faith in me that I can do more. That's how a Jew begins. Self-esteem, friends, is critical to life. And what's the ultimate self-esteem? That Hashem believes in me. Rabba Muna Secha, great is your faith in me. That's the Rebbe's favorite tefillah, and it's symbolic of the whole Teshuvah movement that the Rebbe inspired. What was, it's a new day, and today we're going to connect and transform our past even. Since we're speaking about Maidanis, I should tell you how it should be said. This is custom, it's not halacha, but this is a custom. First of all, it's the first thing we wake up. We sit up, put on our kippah if it fell off. This is how we do it, friends. We sit, we put our hands together, and we bow our heads slightly. That's it, hands together, slightly bowed. In grateful acknowledgement of the new day, the gift of life, and Hashem's faith in me. That He granted me life again, despite that I owe Him plenty. And by right, pull the plug. Hey, here's the recipe. You're not following. This is what life is supposed to be. Pull the plug, we'll try a reincarnation. We'll try a next round. He doesn't do that. This neshama is restored. It doesn't leave the body entirely, of course, we don't die, but it's the words of the Gemara, it's a 60th of death. It's a kind of death sleep. It's a withdrawal of the neshama from full integration to the mind, the heart, and the body. So that's how we do it. And after that, of course, we wash neglavas by our bed. According to the Arizal, one shouldn't put their feet on the floor till they wash neglavas. So you have a bowl, and then you go to the bathroom and so on, and then you wash again after you've cleansed yourself and rinsed your mouth and eyes and you've relieved yourself. Then in the kitchen, wherever, you wash again properly, much more meticulously. Then you make the brachas. You start the morning day. That's how the day begins. All right, friends. So let's begin a little bit, just one paragraph of our journey now to understand the three opinions in the light of Chassidus, how spiritually they talk to all of us, and critically so. So v'yesh lahakdim, we have to first introduce, or preface rather, hachiluk bein oimer v'shtei alechem ba'avodas adam. What's the difference between the oimer offering and the two breads? Oimer offering brought on the second day of Pesach, and the two breads offered when? On Shavuos, in spiritually. Hanaveya, this spiritual difference flows, or as a result, a consequence, by looking at the differences on a simple level. What's the difference? Let's have a look. The Omer offering brought on Pesach is barley, Shehei Michael Behim. Barley traditionally is animal fodder. This is most unusual that an offering the Beis HaMikdash is barley. All of the other minchas, again, the meal offerings, without exception, are all wheat. This one is barley. The only other exception is the soita. Right? I think we mentioned this. The soita, the husband asked her not to be in seclusion with another man, and she did. So she has to bring a korban. And then she's tested. And what's the korban? Of barley. Why, says the Gemara? She did an animalistic act. Even if nothing happened, it's already, you asked not to be in seclusion. Why'd you do that? So she has to bring atonement. And the only other for this act, therefore it's a barley offering accordingly. Of course, she's innocent, she's blessed, and so on. So, conclusion, barley is what in italics, Michael Behema, animal fodder. But the two breads have to be from wheat, Michael Odom, which wheat, of course, is for human consumption. What's going on? You do Abiyah, another two lines. We'll stop here because it's too beautiful. We don't want to hasten it. So Rabbi is going to take us on the whole journey here. What's happening between Pesach and Shavuos, refining the animal within, and what that means. Till we come to the Shtei Alechem, the two breads, we've gone from animal to a mensch. Then we'll understand the three opinions as to what exactly that pinnacle is, Shtei Alechem. There's three levels. We need to strive for all of them. There are three levels. They're all true. Level 1, 2, 3, the highest level. Okay, friends. So Be'ez Hashem,